Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill on problem drug use as set out on the order paper. Mr Deputy Speaker, this pandemic has shone a spotlight on many of the problems we face as a society, but it has also diverted our attention from many other pressing social problems. One of those is the question of problematic drug use, which afflicts every community in every part of this land. Thousands of people are losing their lives. Tens of thousands have their lives and their health blighted, and hundreds of thousands of people living in our communities are compromised, have their lives compromised by the effects of this problem. And yet, the big problem we have, Mr Deputy Speaker, is that the principal piece of legislation that we look to govern this area, the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act, is simply not fit for purpose. In fact, worse than that, it is a hindrance to taking action and compounds the very problems that we perceive. It does this in a number of ways. First of all, by criminalising this entire area in terms of the production, distribution, supply and consumption of drugs. It takes any concept of regulation or control and places that firmly in the hands of organised crime rather than public agencies. Secondly, by stigmatising and criminalising the end user, it makes it very, very difficult for anyone caught up in this problem to seek help. They are often torn between the threats of violence from their supplier and the threat of arrest and detention from the police. Thirdly, Mr Deputy Speaker, it compromises the ability of health service workers to intervene and do something about the problem, in many cases placing them at threat of prosecution as well. And fourthly and finally, it shrouds this entire area in ignorance and a lack of information, so that we cannot shine a light onto the problem and decide what to do with it. It is nearly 50 years since that Act was passed, and I can think of no other piece of legislation relating to social policy which has remained unreformed and unreviewed for half a century. And the case for reform is all the more compelling when we consider that the scale and nature of the problem we face today is so much different than that faced by our predecessors at the end of the 1960s. Drugs have changed. There are more people using them, and we know far more now about what to do with them than ever before. So that is why we should have a comprehensive review of drugs legislation, and I hope and I pray that the government will see the wisdom of doing that at some stage in the near future, and that it will move away from an approach based on criminalisation and prohibition and towards one based on compassion and regulation. But that is not what today is about. That is not what the bill before the House today is about. I do not seek to overturn the 71 Act, nor indeed to amend it. I seek to bring in additional specific measures which will deal with the problems that are right in front of us today. And the first thing we need to do in discussing this whole area is to realise that this is not a new problem. Narcotics have existed for as long as we have. They were there in the past, they will be there in the future. Ever since human beings grew legs, we have been chewing leaves or drinking potions in an attempt to combat pain or overcome boredom. Now, for some, that is a response to dramatic and poor conditions in their lives, but to others, it is simply part of the curiosity inherent in human nature. And we understand much more than we used to about the science behind this problem, and it is still developing. But we know this at least. We know that the problem of drug addiction in our society is principally to do with biochemistry. It is not a moral question about right or wrong. What is happening is not to do with the actions of some aberrant individuals who are deciding to be bad. It is a social problem about how we interact with our world and our environment. Mr Deputy Speaker, when people like me make these arguments, there are usually two arguments that are thrown against us. The first is to say that the drug problems in society are a result of many other social ills. The incohesion that we have in our society, the poverty, the inequality, the abuse, the violence, the mental health crisis we have, all of these are the things that we should be concentrating on, and we are misplacing our energy if we simply talk about reforming drug laws. Mr Deputy Speaker, I know of no one on this side of the argument who doesn't call for radical change in social policy to try and overcome the policies that we are afflicted by. But I have to say it is a false choice to present this as either you do that or you reform drugs legislation. We need to do both. Because the fact of the matter is that whilst in many cases these social problems are the consequences of drug addiction, in some cases they are also the causes of them too, and there is an interrelationship that must be addressed. Absolutely. The second thing that is argued when people like me say things like this are that we are going soft on drugs. To use the Home Office's phrase, we're giving the wrong impression, as if somehow reforming the criminal law in this matter would encourage drug consumption or addiction or problematic drug use. The problem with that argument, Mr Deputy Speaker, is not only that there is not a shred of evidence to support it, there is abundant evidence to support the opposite point of view. Over the last 20 years, there have been many countries which have had often radical and dramatic changes in the legal framework that surrounds drugs. In not one single instance has this led to an increase in the problem. Everywhere, it has led to a reduction in the problem. Fewer users, fewer drugs, fewer deaths, fewer demands on law enforcement. That is the fact of the matter across the world. In Portugal today, which has taken serious action, probably more than any other European country, 4 people for every million of the population die from problem drug use. 4 people per million. The figure in the United Kingdom is 85 people per million. Now that should mean that we do something about it, and I hope very much that we will. To turn to some of the specifics in the bill, much of this debate has talked about drug consumption rooms, and I want to be very clear just how irritated and frustrated I become when some people refer to these glibly as shooting galleries, as if they were a site of entertainment or relaxation. I have visited these facilities in Canada, Germany and in Portugal, and I can tell you they are as far away from anyone's concept of recreation as it is possible to get. They also, I understand, some people just don't understand it. They don't understand how it can be that by providing a facility to help people, to allow people to take their own drugs, how can that be in any way helping them? Surely we should be intervening with rehabilitation. Surely we should be offering them help and advice. Mr Deputy Speaker, the people that say that misunderstand the problem and they misunderstand this proposal. You cannot give advice to a dead person. This proposal and the facilities of drug treatment rooms and drug consumption rooms are about keeping people alive today so that we can make those interventions tomorrow. They are, in effect, overdose prevention centres. Because this entire matter is shrouded in the criminal law, most of the 5,546 people who died from this problem last year, most of them died alone behind closed doors. And they died unintentionally because by the time they realised something was wrong, it was too late to call for help. But the horror, the real horror, Mr Deputy Speaker, is not the deaths. It is the fact that they are entirely preventable if we choose to bring this whole area into the light and look at it seriously. In my last minute, I want to address how policy is made in this Parliament. We have a select committee system where committees of members are set up to scrutinise areas of legislation and executive action. Over the last year, both the Scottish Affairs and the Health Select Committee have done exactly this in this field. They have brought forward experts, they have studied the matter in detail, and they have made, independently of each other, the same recommendations which reflect the proposals on the face of this bill. And the response of the government has been woeful to reject these recommendations out of hand. And I say to the government, this matter will not go away. You cannot keep your head in the sand. Take it out and tell us what the alternative is. And if the UK government is incapable of acting as a state on this problem, then give the capacity and the power to the devolved administrations so that the countries of this land can learn from each other. Mr Deputy Speaker, I move.
I've had no indication that anybody intends to oppose this particular motion, so I intend to put the question. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Mr Deputy Speaker, Ronnie Cowan, Alison Thewlis, Tonya Antonazzi, Clive Lewis, Ben Lake, Caroline Lucas, Crispin Blunt, Graham Morris, Jeff Smith, Wendy Chamberlain, Pete Wishart and myself.
Tommy Shepherd.
Problem drug use bill.
Second reading what day?
13th of November 2020.
13th of December 2020.
13th of November.
13th of November 2020. Thank you very much.